digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam special. Today we're coming at you live from Manchester, where we're at the Business Rocks event. And I'm joined today by Pete from Dubbit, who comes once again onto the show, and Colin, who's back again. Hello guys, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
So we've just done a stage panel talking about VR and the next generation. And I suppose what I want to do is really continue the conversation. So we were talking a little bit about what we felt was going to be the kind of the next step, if you like, from VR, and we talked about this kind of crossover into AR and mixed reality. And I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on this, Colin, because I felt like you had more to say.
Well, I think my main feeling is that both VR and AR are extremely exciting, but that they tend to get lumped together as the same technology, and they're just slightly different takes on it. When actually, I think what we're going to see is they'll just get used for completely different things, and in different ways by different people and in different environments. That I think, VR, even as headsets get lighter and they solve the sweaty head problem and everything improves, it's still going to be something you do for relatively short periods. You're not going to be doing it for hours and hours at a time. Whereas I think AR, if you look at what Google did with the Google Glass, is something that if you extrapolate forward and it becomes built into every set of Ray-Bans, is something you could wear all day, every day. You could go to a conference, you could walk around, it could be looking at everyone you're looking at, doing some image analysis, recognising who the person is, looking them up on LinkedIn, referencing your emails, figuring out when was the last time you spoke to them. Do you even want to speak to them?
Do you know, that actually brings me to a question that I didn't manage to ask during the panel, but if we are in this environment where we're able to see, like, the image of somebody and know, a bit about them and all that background and history and stuff like that, do we get to a point where actually we become really lazy as human beings? Like, we forget how to cognitively remember stuff about people because actually we just rely on the technology to do it for us.
But we do that already. I think it's just it's a continuation of our current trend. I mean, right now, we just use Google for everything. We don't have to remember stuff. We can just Google it, This is just the next step.
Do you think it's necessarily a good thing?
Looking at it from a kid's perspective, as long as it helps them get to what they want to get to, I think that's the interest. If you're looking at content from kids, they now do not need to know channels and how to spell Peppa Pig, because if they put P into YouTube and it brings up Peppa Pig, they get to it. So actually it starts to change the way they search, and that's interesting because it means they don't need to remember as much. So it will change their memory and the way they think and the way they search things. It fails if it doesn't get them to the right content, and I think that's still the issue. So I think from an adult perspective it's interesting because you don't have time to remember everything, so it's a useful tool, but actually it probably trains you not to remember everything. From a kid's perspective it's interesting from it will change the way their memories and minds develop.
Yes. Do you think though that, so for example with something like, let's take for example handwriting, how many people have decent good old fashioned handwriting, and being able to craft a decent letter, for example? How many people can really do that these days? Because actually it's a bit of an art form that we've lost, because we do just use keyboards to type, or we have all these automation tools.
Or not keyboards to type.
But I'm curious as to whether or not you think there is going to be some equivalent of that's going to happen because of this next generation of VR, AR type technology.
I think undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, handwriting's a good example. That my handwriting's absolutely terrible because I just never write.
Never write anything down.
I do all my notes on my iPad, get synced across all my devices. I cut and paste into emails. But it's interesting that handwriting has, it used to be just what you had to do all day, every day. But actually now there's a bit of a special feel to it, that if I want to make an impression, I'll write a handwritten note to someone.
Badly handwritten.
Well, yes. and it does make more of an impression because people know actually this isn't the day to day. Handwriting used to be the day to day, and you would, if you wanted something posh, you would type it, and now I think it's reversed.
So do you think that we'll get to that stage where actually just a good old-fashioned handshake will become the odd, unusual thing because we don't do it anymore?
I mean, I think just meeting in person will be less common. As the concept of presence in VR improves, we will see more meetings and conferences happen in a virtual space. Right now, it's not a good enough experience. There's nothing like just walking around and chatting to the person next to you, sitting next to you at a talk or
bit of eye contact
in front of you in the line. As the hardware and software improves, that we're able to replicate that. Yeah, there'll be more virtual conferences, won't there? So meeting in person, the handshake, the germs you spread at conferences will become special.
Should I be washing my hands? But actually, I want to pick up on something you said, Pete, during the panel and kind of expand on that a little bit. And this idea of kids being really good at curating their own kind of social media image, if you like. And this idea that actually, when we look at the nature of social media profiles, it is very much a curated moment of who we are. It's not really a representation of us as individuals. It's all the best bits of us that we want everybody else to see. And I'm curious from a VR perspective or even an AR perspective, when you are, having these things pop up on and people are able to see a little bit of information about you, whether or not this becomes kind of a latent skill that we all end up having is this idea of curating ourselves to present best possible, projection of the image that we need in order to actually, have the engagement with people. Do you think this is going to be a skill set, maybe like SEO, but for VR?
I think the interesting... We've spoken about this before, actually. I remember having a conversation around kind of social curation. And our generation, social curation is... Firstly, we didn't grow up with it, so it's something we've learned. And it's something we now manage. And if you look on Facebook, everything is curated and perfect. And if you look at Instagram, it's all, filtered and everything is really specific, even to the extent where you've got kids, maybe like 14, 15 plus, who if they don't get 100 likes on or loves on Instagram or Facebook, will take it off straight away. So it is very curated. I think the next generation is, let me see if I can say this right, a less curated. I actually think they're happy to have the rough and ready up there as well. So they're happy. So if they're on Minecraft, which is a social network, they're happy for people to see their failures on Minecraft and to see where they learned and how they developed. So they're not actually curating out the failures. They're kind of like showing their workings in there. That's what I'd really like social media to become, kind of that power to good for creator tools and openness. Now Minecraft is very, very different because it isn't your face and your personality, but it kind of is to an extent. And I think that's the nice trend we see when we look at under nines, is that they don't need to be polished. They're happy for their friends to know they've failed or they've got better at something. So it might be slightly different in the future.
What's your take on this, Colin?
Yeah, I think it is something we'll get better at. I think it's something we're doing anyway. I mean, we manage our CV, we manage how we introduce ourselves at conferences. I think the emphasis will just move away from your written CV and onto your social presence, and our skills will adapt. And finally, in many decades to come, careers advice in schools might cotton on to this, and once everyone's mastered it, they'll start trying to give advice on it as well.
I'm curious because one of the other areas that we didn't really cover while we were on the stage earlier was just in terms of AI. And I think it is one of those areas that actually, if you're going to talk about VR and AR, at some point in time, the conversation also has to turn to AI. Because, it is one of those fundamental kind of under the bonnet engine tools that really need to work alongside these technologies to be able to facilitate a whole broad range of different things. And I'm curious to hear perhaps from you, Pete, to start with, what your thoughts are in terms of this integration and the need for AI within these experiences.
AI for me is the most interesting thing right now, because it doesn't quite work yet. And one of the big things that we found when talking to kids, and I spoke about surfacing content, is they often get frustrated surfacing content because everything has been descheduled. Everything's on demand, anytime, anywhere. And if you ask a kid to go and find something new, sometimes it's quite hard because where do you go? Where do you start? And I think AI, when it gets smart enough, may be a big facilitator of discoverability, which is, if someone masters it, a really, really interesting area. So for me, I look at AI from that perspective, content discovery, and I know Sky with their latest remote control have got the little black button, doesn't do anything yet, but will do something. And when we start looking at that kind of thing, voice recognition, and actually that giving you back intelligence and learning is really, really, the learning part is really interesting. So that for me is perhaps the most interesting part about the data that sits behind these front ends that we talk about on big stages is probably more interesting than the front end stuff.
Yeah. I'm curious though, in terms of the new Facebook AI, that if you're looking at a picture, it can verbally tell you what's in the picture, and vice versa. Do we think that's kind of where we see the beginnings of this AI really starting to become useful and powerful?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is just the next interface. You know, in the 70s at Xerox PARC and stuff, they came up with what's now the mouse that's ubiquitous for using PCs. The next obvious interface to make it even easier for us as humans to communicate is conversational. So to me, it's really interesting looking at what Apple have done with Siri, or acquired with Siri, a few years ago. What Facebook are moving into. Yeah, let's get away from having to learn to type and having to learn to use a mouse and having to learn a Windows interface. Long term, you should be able to just say what you want, and a bit of AI figures out what that actually means in ones and zeros, does it for you, and delivers the results in a way you want it, whether that's a synthesized speech like Siri talking back at you, or a visual result, or just whatever's most appropriate.
So do you think that we're going to get to that stage where actually we don't really need to learn about how to utilise a system, that it will just be an intuitive conversation that we're having?
Potentially, but don't know how long, when, why, how. I think going back to the question around handwriting and how we use these systems, the first question is it important that we still know how to handwrite? And I think if it is, then we need to find this kind of path where you still have these traditional ways of using things and marry them with new ways of using things. If it's not important that you still know how to write, then get rid of it and bring in this new version. I think that's the first question: is does it actually matter?
Do you know, it's interesting that you say this, because I'm sure that if we have any educators listening to this show, they're probably all cringing right now and grinding their teeth, because for them, they are in this system that has been around for an awfully long time, and this curriculum hasn't really been overhauled all that much in the last kind of 100 years or so. But do we think that perhaps there is a need to overhaul the way that we think and our attitudes towards education, and the knowledge that is required to give to a child before they hit 16 and they go out into the big bad world and become individuals in that world? Colin?
I think maybe not quite yet, but before too long, I think the skills we need are going to change vastly. I mean, pretty soon, what would be the point in driving when it's all driverless, self-driving cars? Is there, just thinking off the top of my head, is there going to be much less point in learning to speak a foreign language if you can have it simultaneously and accurately translated by your phone or AR device or whatever it is? And in which case it's about figuring out how to use that technology rather than remembering how to conjugate a bank of verbs, So we're not there yet. We're years away from it. But I think it's worth putting some thought into, because it may be the direction we need to go. And whichever society masters that, it's going to be a pretty big advantage.
Okay.
My wife's a teacher.
Yes.
Her family are teachers. I work with we work with a lot with educators from a professional perspective and outside of work, who are both traditional and also forward thinking and think things need to change. And I think the important point is that the educators need to be part of the conversation.
Yes.
Because I think there's, given those two examples that Colin's got, is, if people don't have to learn to speak a foreign language because everything's translated, does that mean they can spend their time doing something useful? Versus the flip side of that, if they don't learn a foreign language, are they losing part of their brain, which is really important to us? And I think that I don't have an answer for that because I'm not smart enough to understand. That's very longitudinal anyway, and that feels to me like one of the reasons why the education system hasn't been updated is because it's quite complex. The human mind is very, very complex. But what I do know is the human species is pretty adaptable. We just need to figure out what works for us, and people only use what they're comfortable with.
Do you think, though, with this idea that, for example, if you've got an AR device or some kind of, immediate translation device, always translating everything into your own language, that because of that, there is going to be this kind of lack, if you like, or people aren't going to have the desire to necessarily actually learn about the culture because they now understand the language, therefore they get it. And there is maybe even, to a certain extent, an unwillingness to necessarily even learn about the culture that created the language.
Or the other way around, that they are actually now able to communicate with another culture seamlessly and therefore learn about it. I know that's just one example.
Yeah. No, there's two sides to the coin, isn't there? Yeah.
Curious to see how that one pans out. Come back in 5 years' time. We'll be on another session. We'll talk about this very subject again. But I am curious, just in terms of your big vision for what you think is going to be most important, kind of significant, whether it's technical or possibly cultural change that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years that could help to get us to the end point of these things that we're talking about. Curious what you think is going to be that big shift. Colin?
I mean, for me, everything that's been a big shift in the last 5-10 years has all been about ease of use. It's not the best technology. It's not what gives the biggest advantage. It's what's easiest to use. Phones were around for ages, and then Apple came along and made one that was easy to use. There was plenty of social networks before Facebook, but it just made it nice and easy to use. And for me, it's the same thing. We need VR devices that are better quality in terms of hardware, better experiences in terms of software, more accessible. None of this half hour to set up and you put it on and it goes out of sync and you fall through the floor. It needs to be easy to use. It doesn't, you look at Minecraft, that's not the best graphics in the world, but yet it's taken the world over. Any games company looking at that before it came out would have dismissed it completely out of hand. It's not about having the highest quality graphics. And so the likes of VR, I think, is falling into that trap, that it's thinking about pushing the graphics, which drives the frame rate and therefore the experience down, rather than just thinking about the experience. And to me that applies with everything, with AR, AI. It's all about how do we make it easy to use. I'm not going to spend there repeating something 10 times until Siri understands me. I'm quickly going to give up on that. If my self-driving car keeps going the wrong way, I'm going to start switching it into manual mode. Make it easy to use.
Okay. Nice, simple message. Pete, what about you?
Identical response, because I think, for example, the experience side of things is interesting because we spoke about on stage, Google Cardboard, people try to do things perhaps a bit too much, and then perhaps they just think about how to make a 30-second experience really good, because that will push people to it. So that's simplicity in terms of content. But when we talk about AI or voice recognition, for example, and languages, that is still a platform that you need to learn a language for. So it's not like when you speak to AI, you speak English. You don't. You speak in somewhere between English and ones and zeros. It's that and that's not easy to use because that's learning a new language or learning a new way of talking that's not intuitive.
Yeah.
What's really important is that it's simple and usable. And I think there's two things. You either make it the most simple, or you create a platform that, like Facebook, that you can't that becomes the language that you learn. Even if it's not most simple, it becomes mass adopted, and therefore you have to learn it to use it.
Yeah.
I think that's where Facebook's really interesting from that perspective.
Well, I was just going to jump in. I mean, it's just occurred to me that my mum, has a PC, tries to use email, tries to browse the web, and generally does a decent job. But the minute she gets stuck, she'll phone me up. And then you have this bizarre situation where she's sitting in a room with a computer, she's talking down the phone, describing in conversational English what she wants to do. I have to convert that into figuring out what she needs to do physically, but describe it to her in a way she understands, which she then back in that room then does with a mouse and keyboard. And you're just thinking, that's a ridiculous situation. That's not a skilled job on my, for who we are now. 20 years ago, that would have been a skilled job. But now, any kid on the street could tell her how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to automate that. She needs just to be able to describe it to her computer going, how do I print this email? How do I reply to all rather than just reply to one? She needs to say it like that and have the computer reliably do it rather than phone me up. Not that I'm trying to discourage my mother from phoning me up, of course.
Yes, Colin's mum, don't worry, she does want you to call.
Absolutely.
But as always with the show, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a bit more about what you're up to and to track you down. So if you could share with us your social media handle of choice, Colin.
Sure, so I'm Scottish Colin on Twitter.
And Pete.
I'm Peter Robinson 81 on Twitter, but perhaps for the purpose of today, also We Are VR, which is WEARVR.
Thank you very much for joining us today, guys, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. I have been Tanya, the founder of Digital Jam and your host for the Digital Jam sessions, and don't forget to follow us at Digital Jam Ltd.
digitaljamsessions.com